Member for Wellington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The story of the Dutch in Canada begins well before Confederation. In fact, it starts in 1614, south of the border in what is New York State. In 1614, the Dutch established trading posts at New Amsterdam, present-day New York City, and at Fort Orange, present-day Albany, New York. They named their new colony New Netherland. And today, scores of places in present-day New York trace their roots back to Dutch names. Places like the Bronx, Brooklyn, Broadway, Harlem, Wall Street, Long Island, Staten Island, Rensselaer, Stuyvesant, and many more. The flag of New York City is a Dutch flag, the Prince's flag, introduced in the 17th century. And during the 17th century, thousands of Dutch immigrants moved to the new colony. They settled in present-day New York City, up the Hudson River Valley, into upstate New York, in present-day New Jersey, and in present-day Connecticut. And these Dutch immigrants brought with them ideas that have endured to this very day, ideas that have laid the foundation for Canadian and American society. Ideas such as diversity, tolerance, and religious freedom. New Netherland, like the Netherlands of the 17th century, was a haven for religious diversity. For example, in 1655, the rule for religious freedom was upheld, and full residency was granted to Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jews in New Amsterdam. As a result of the Flushing Remonstrance in 1657, full religious freedom was granted to the Quakers. And in the 1640s, two religious leaders, both women, took refuge in New Netherland, Anne Hutchison and the Anabaptist Lady Deborah Moody. A direct line can be traced from that religious freedom in the Dutch colony of New Netherland to the freedom of religion enshrined in the Canadian and American constitutions. When the Treaty of Westminster transferred the colony from the Dutch to the British Crown in 1674, the thousands of Dutch remained as loyal subjects of their new sovereign. New Netherland was renamed the Province of New York, and New Amsterdam was renamed New York City. A century later came the American Revolution. Some of the Dutch sided with the rebels, while others remained loyal to the British. By this time, many of the Dutch had been anglicized after having been in the New World for some 2.5 centuries. And after the American Revolution, those loyal to the British fled the 13 colonies and headed north to the Maritimes and to present-day Ontario. People like Joseph Ryerson, the father of Egerton Ryerson, the founder of Ontario's public education system. And subsequent to that wave, first wave of Dutch fleeing the Revolution, came many more waves, some from the Netherlands directly and others via the United States. And they have made big contributions to this country. People like the painter Cornelius Krieghoff, composer Alan de Ritter, photographer Jason Van Bruggen, film director Patricia Ruzema, actress Sonia Smits, and author Aretha Van Herk. Many Dutch Canadians have contributed to government, such as the first Surveyor General of British North America, Samuel Holland. They've contributed to business, like Sir William Cornelius Van Horn, the builder of Canada's transcontinental railway. And they have contributed to our national pastime hockey, players like Joe Nieuwendyk, Trevor Linden, and Steve Yzerman. Today, over 1 million Canadians identify themselves of Dutch origin. And today that story has come full circle. I am one of those million Canadians of Dutch origin. I am here today, Madam Speaker, because my Dutch mother and her family were liberated by Canadian soldiers 74 years ago this May 5th. Some 7,600 Canadians died in the liberation of the Netherlands. They died in the canals, the fields, the little villages and cities of that country. They never came home, and thousands of Canadian war graves dot the Dutch countryside. They died so that my mother and her family could live, and we will never forget. Madam Speaker, the motion in front of us today says that, in the opinion of this House, in recognition of the sacrifices made by Canadians in the liberation of the Netherlands, as well as the contributions made to Canada by those of Dutch heritage, the government should recognize every May 5th as Dutch Heritage Day to honor this unique bond. This motion captures the Dutch story on the North American continent and the unique bond that ties the Canadian and Dutch people together. This is a motion that recognizes 4 centuries of history on this continent and the continued ties that bind our two peoples. The Dutch continue to this day to have tight ties with this country, both across the Atlantic and north and south of the border. I was in Washington several weeks ago, Madam Speaker, and I met with Representative Bill Huizinga from Western Michigan. He too is of Dutch origin, and his wife is a Canadian, also of Dutch origin, from Brampton, Ontario, and they spend every other Christmas with her family in Peel Region. There are thousands of stories like that throughout this country. The Dutch have worked hard to settle this country over many, many years and have contributed greatly in all facets of our national life. And, Madam Speaker, this country is made up of a diversity of different groups, people from all origins, all religions, all races, all walks of life. And that legacy that we have been granted here in this country of religious freedom, of tolerance, of diversity, is one of the greatest contributions the Dutch have made to our society and that south of the border. In the 17th century, it was the Dutch that were a haven for persecuted religious minorities, and remained so for many centuries thereafter, whether it was Quakers fleeing the United Kingdom, whether it was Huguenots fleeing the south of France, whether it was independently minded philosophers like René Descartes or other thinkers who were at odds with the church doctrine at the time. And those ideas were adopted by the Dutch in their new colony in the New World. And they were further continued after the transfer of that colony and subsequently into the American Constitution. And so it too is with us. These ideas infused the way we treated religious minorities on this continent prior to Confederation and afterwards. So, Madam Speaker, for all those reasons, I encourage members of this House to support this motion and to recognize the contributions made over many centuries by people from the Netherlands.